My mom abandoned me when I was a kid, and now she disrespects my wife for not understanding her struggles. Me, 38. Male. When I was 10, losing dad felt like the universe had suddenly tilted on its axis. It wasn't just a quiet, peaceful kind of passing, it was abrupt, shocking, the kind you replay in your mind over and over, trying to make sense of it. He was there one day, his laughter filling up our small living room, and then he wasn't. The details around his death were messy and painful, too much for a kid to really grasp, but enough that the memories just sort of stick with you. Mom took it hard. Really, hard. She tried to hold it together, but you could see the strain in her eyes, the way her hands shook a little more each day. She wasn't the same after that. None of us were. Our home felt like a completely different world. One where the colors had faded and the sounds were muffled. Mom, who used to be the heart of our house, filling it with warmth and laughter, suddenly seemed like a shadow of herself. She'd sit at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the coffee she'd poured but never drank, lost in thoughts that clearly pained her. I remember the morning she told us about her decision to move back to her home country. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly, betraying the storm inside her. Our house, once vibrant with our family's daily routines, felt increasingly empty and silent. The walls echoed with the ghost of our past conversations, and each room held a memory of Dad's laughter, or his comforting presence. Being there, Mom said, was too much of a reminder of what we'd lost. She needed space to grieve away from the environment that echoed his absence. It's just for a little while, she said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I need some time to heal, to find some peace. The word temporary hung in the air, but as a kid, I didn't grasp the full weight of what was happening. I just nodded, thinking she'd be back soon, that this was just a short break and everything would go back to normal. Mom's move, intended to be a brief escape from her grief, became a permanent arrangement. Her brief visits were filled with awkwardness and a palpable tension, as if she was a guest rather than the mother who had raised us. I could see the guilt in her eyes, the struggle to reconnect with the children who felt more like strangers now. As weeks turned into months and then years, the reality of her prolonged absence settled in. Birthdays and holidays came and went without her. Phone calls were our only bridge, her voice becoming less familiar over time, strained with a sadness that didn't seem to fade. Each call was a reminder of the widening gap between our old life with Dad and our new reality. After Mom left, it was the Nelsons who took us in. They were old family friends, the kind who had known us since we were in diapers. Mr. Nelson was Dad's college buddy, and Mrs. Nelson had been Mom's maid of honor. They tried to fill the void as best they could, turning their guest room into our new bedroom, stocking the fridge with our favorite snacks, and even trying to keep up the same holiday traditions we used to celebrate as a family. Despite their kindness, the house never quite felt like home. It was always a bit too clean, a bit too quiet, lacking the chaotic warmth that had filled our own home. At night, the walls seemed to echo with the silence, a stark reminder that this wasn't just a sleepover, that our mom wasn't going to be back at the end of the weekend. I remember lying in that guest bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to my sister breathe softly in the bed next to mine. She seemed to adapt better, or maybe she just hid her feelings more. Nights were the hardest for me. That's when the what-ifs would haunt me. What if I had been less of a hassle, quieter, easier to handle? Would Mom have stayed if I hadn't been so much like Dad, as she often said I was? These thoughts would spiral, and I'd find myself gasping for air, feeling that old familiar pang of abandonment. Mrs. Nelson would hear me sometimes, her soft knock on the door a prelude to her sitting by my bed, whispering reassurances, trying to soothe the fears and doubts that gnawed at me. But no matter how gentle her touch or kind her words, they couldn't replace the comfort that would have come from my own mom's embrace. This experience shaped how I parent my own kids. I've always made it a point to be there for them, to be a constant presence in their lives. I've gone overboard at times, maybe, being too protective, too present. I want them to feel secure, to know I'm always there, no matter what. Because the absence of my mom, her choice to distance herself when we needed her most, left a void in my life that I've sworn never to replicate in theirs. It's tough sometimes, knowing that Mom was just grappling with her own grief while trying to find a way to cope. I understand it on a rational level, but emotionally, it still stings. Accepting her decision has been one of the hardest parts of growing up, and even now, it's a struggle not to let that old resentment color the love I still have for her. My wife, a wonderful woman, we married and have 2 wonderful childs together. I met my wife in college, a stroke of luck that I still thank my stars for. We had both chosen the same dreary morning lecture, Economics 101, and it turned out the only thing more potent than our mutual disdain for the subject was our instant connection. She sat next to me on the first day, her presence a stark contrast to the monotonous tone of the professor. She had this way of scribbling notes that was almost artistic, her expressions flickering between amusement and exasperation. We started sharing notes, then coffee, and eventually, our dreams and fears. Telling her about my family came later, when our casual coffees had turned into long dinners and we started thinking about a future together. It was a summer evening, one of those perfect ones where the air is just cool enough to be comfortable. We were at a little park near campus, watching the sunset paint the sky in strokes of orange and gold. I felt the weight of my past nudging at me, urging me to open up about everything. I started with the good memories, my dad's roaring laughter, the way he used to scoop me up into the air, my mom's holiday cookies, and the noise of a house that felt full. But then I shifted to the harder truths. I explained how things changed after Dad passed away, how the brightness dimmed and how Mom eventually moved away. I told her about the years of feeling adrift, being raised by family friends who were kind but couldn't fill the void my mom left. My wife listened quietly, her hand finding mine as I talked. Her eyes never left my face, and in them, I saw a well of empathy and understanding. When I finished, there was a soft sigh, a slight squeeze of her hand around mine, signaling her support. She didn't bombard me with questions or pity. Instead, she shared her own story of loss, how she grew up without grandparents and much of her extended family, which made her feel isolated in a different way. That night, I realized how much I needed someone who didn't just know my joy but also understood my pain. It felt like a burden had lifted, sharing my past with her, and her acceptance and understanding of my family's complicated dynamics only deepened my feelings for her. It was then I knew she was more than just a partner. She was my ally. Someone who would stand by me through the complexities of life. Ever since I shared my family history with my wife, there's been this unspoken tension hovering around the subject of my mom. My wife, being the incredibly supportive partner she is, has always been understanding about my feelings but has harbored a certain reluctance towards my mom herself. It's not out of malice or disrespect, it's more about her struggle to reconcile the abandonment I felt as a child. With the woman she's met a few times since we got married, I've tried to explain to her that my mom was just trying to cope in her own way after my dad's death. She was grieving, lost without him, I'd say, hoping to bridge the emotional gap that my mom's departure had created not just in my life but now in our marriage too. It wasn't that she didn't love us, she just needed time. But to my wife, who sees the world through lenses tinted with fierce loyalty to family, the idea that a mother could leave her children in the care of others, regardless of the circumstances, is a pill too bitter to swallow. She's never rude about it, never dismissive of my ongoing relationship with my mom. She encourages me to call her, supports my trips back home to see her, and she's always the first to suggest we send gifts on Mother's Day. But she remains distant, a polite coldness setting the boundaries of their interaction. During family gatherings or holiday dinners when my mom is around, my wife is cordial, but distant. She'll smile, engage in small talk, but there's a guardedness in her eyes, a firm line drawn that everyone seems to understand. "I'm here for you," she whispers to me, squeezing my hand under the table, a silent reassurance that her stance isn't meant to hurt me, but a boundary she sets for herself. It's a delicate balance, navigating this quiet standoff between them. I often find myself in the middle, an interpreter translating not just words but emotions and unspoken thoughts. I tell my mom, she's just fiercely protective of those she loves, hoping to soften her hurt at my wife's standoffish demeanor. To my wife, I gently remind, Mom has her flaws, but she regrets those years away, trying to kindle empathy in the ashes of past grievances. This dynamic, though far from ideal, has become a part of our life's rhythm. My wife's steadfast support of my relationship with my mom, without choosing to engage more deeply herself, speaks volumes of her respect for me, even if it's a compromise she silently bears. It's a silent testament to her strength and her deep understanding of my need to maintain that fragile thread with my past. Recently, I decided it was time for another trip back to my home country, to let the kids spend some time with their grandmother. My wife couldn't make it due to her demanding job, and while she encouraged us to go, I could tell she was relieved not to face the tension that usually accompanied these visits. I explained the situation to my mom when we landed, and she nodded, saying she understood, but her disappointment was palpable. The first few days were a blur of activities. My mom went all out, taking the kids to local parks and museums, filling our days with laughter and stories, almost as if making up for all the missed time. In those moments, watching her with the kids, it was easy to forget the complex layers of emotions that usually clouded her visits back home. The evening had started off well enough. We were at my mom's house. My aunt's laughter echoing through the kitchen as she cooked, the smell of spices filling the air, a reminder of so many childhood meals. It felt good to be home, even if home now had the bittersweet edge of missing voices and past grievances. My mom and my aunt, they've always had this way of making even the simplest meal feel like a feast, and tonight was no exception. I was looking forward to a quiet evening, just family, sharing stories and catching up. The kids, exhausted by the day's adventures, fell asleep almost as soon as their heads hit the pillows. I kissed them goodnight and headed downstairs where my mom and aunt were in the kitchen, glasses of wine in hand, ostensibly relaxed. The murmur of their conversation greeted me as I approached, but it was my wife's name that caught my attention, halting my steps. "She thinks she's too good for us," my aunt's voice floated up, tinged with resentment. There was a clink of glass, probably my mom nodding in agreement as she added, "Yes, but don't bring it up around him. She's a snob, but it's not worth the argument." It stung, hearing that. There in the dim light of the stairwell, a knot tightened in my stomach. My wife has always been meticulous about how she interacts with my family, careful never to flaunt her background or make anyone feel less. She'd go out of her way to connect, to show interest in their lives, even if it meant stepping out of her comfort zone. Her reticence at times, I knew, was out of a fear of overstepping, not a feeling of superiority. Hearing my wife referred to in such terms, by my own family, sparked a heat in my chest that was hard to tamp down. I lingered on the stairs, unseen, the familiar ache of being caught between the people I loved surfacing once again. They continued, oblivious to my presence, airing grievances that were usually spoken in hushed tones behind closed doors. I wrestled with my emotions, debating whether to confront them or retreat. The decision was made for me when my mom glanced up and caught my eye, her expression shifting from surprise to something like guilt. The conversation snapped off, replaced by a tense silence that filled the room like smoke. "I heard what you said," I found myself speaking, my voice steadier than I felt. My aunt tried to brush it off, saying it was just a slip of the tongue, but the damage was done. The air was thick with unsaid things, with years of miscommunications and hurt feelings. I explained, maybe more sharply than I intended, that my wife had never acted superior, that she simply prioritized her career and our family's well-being over everything else. My wife grew up in a world quite different from mine. Born into a wealthy family, she was the only child, the sole focus of her parents' affection and hopes. Tragically, her parents passed away when she was still in her teens, an event that thrust her into premature adulthood. They left her everything: their sprawling estate, significant investments, and various other assets. Despite the wealth and responsibilities that fell on her shoulders at such a young age, she never let it define her. Instead, she channeled her energies into her studies and later, her career, proving to everyone that her achievements were born of her own intelligence and hard work, not just her inheritance. She enjoys the finer things in life, sure, the kind of luxury she grew up with. High-end fashion, gourmet foods, vacations in far-flung destinations. But she carries it all with a grace and an ease that's devoid of arrogance. She's unapologetic about her tastes, yes, but never ostentatious. In contrast, I come from a solidly middle-class background. My family's world was smaller, our means more modest. We valued hard work, simple pleasures, and close community ties. Our house, always filled with warmth and laughter, was humble but happy. This stark difference in our upbringings was never lost on me, and initially I worried about how my family would perceive her, or she them. Despite these differences, my wife has never behaved superiorly or looked down on my upbringing. She's been nothing but respectful towards my family, always engaging in conversations, offering to help with meals during visits, and bringing thoughtful gifts that showed her attention to what they might appreciate, not just expensive items for the sake of display. Yet the underlying class difference sometimes creates an unspoken tension, especially with my mother. Mom, with her down-to-earth values and no-nonsense approach to life, has sometimes struggled to connect with my wife's world. Though my wife has made every effort to bridge the gap, ensuring she doesn't flaunt her wealth or make my family feel uncomfortable, there's always been a subtle, perhaps imagined, barrier there. This difference in backgrounds is sometimes amplified by the innocuous comments at family gatherings, or the slightly too long glances at my wife's designer clothes and accessories. I know it comes more from a place of unfamiliarity and perhaps a bit of envy, rather than any real disapproval. My wife understands this too, and handles such situations with a kindness and a deftness that make me love her all the more. She tries to put my family at ease, often downplaying her lifestyle and focusing on the many things we all have in common. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, the frustration evident in my voice. It was clear they hadn't intended for me to hear their words, and my mom's face fell, an apology forming on her lips. My aunt, ever the more confrontational, didn't back down. "She doesn't mingle with us like she's one of us because she thinks she's better," she stated bluntly, her eyes challenging me to contradict her. That hurt. It hurt because it wasn't true. "That's not it," I replied, my voice firm. "She's trying her best. Just because she doesn't always know how to show it, doesn't mean she feels she's above us. You're misreading her caution as contempt." My mom, softer, more apologetic, tried to soothe the rising tension. "We're just not used to her ways, that's all. Maybe we misjudged her a bit. she conceded, her eyes avoiding mine. But the damage was done. The evening's warmth evaporated, replaced by a chill that no amount of familial bond could easily dispel. I sat down with them, trying to explain further, sharing how my wife had often expressed her worries about not fitting in, about being seen as an outsider. It was a long conversation, one filled with admissions and reluctant understanding. My aunt listened, her expression showing defiance. They clearly didn't expect me to hear any of it, and my aunt said that my wife's refusal to interact with them is because she thinks she's better than them. I explained that isn't the case, but my aunt kept pushing the issue. Eventually my mom said it was fine if my wife felt that way, but I shouldn't defend her classist behavior. At this point I snapped and said that my wife resents my mom because she wasn't around when I was a kid. My mom and aunt didn't say anything to that, and I went back upstairs. After the conversation with my mom and aunt, the house felt colder, quieter. I needed to clear my head, so I stepped out onto the back porch, the night air crisp against my skin. Pulling out my phone, I sent a quick text to my sister, hoping she could offer some perspective. She's always had a way of seeing the middle ground, even when emotions ran high. Her response came back almost immediately, a testament to how often she played mediator in our family. Just apologize to mom and aunt, okay? It's not worth the fight. That was just like her, always advocating for peace, even if it meant swallowing your pride. I stared at the phone, her words glowing in the dim light. It wasn't that simple for me. I didn't hold a grudge against mom for the choices she made when we were kids. I understood they were made under the weight of immense grief. But hearing her and my aunt speak so dismissively about my wife, as if her efforts to fit in and respect their ways meant nothing, stirred a defensiveness in me I couldn't easily quash. It wasn't just the words themselves that had cut deep, it was the realization that these conversations had probably happened before, not just tonight. That my mom and aunt had likely shared these thoughts between themselves, painting my wife in a light that was so far from the truth. It felt like a betrayal, not just to my wife, but to the efforts we'd both made to bridge our very different worlds. Sitting there in the quiet of the night, I typed out a response to my sister. I get what you're saying, but it's not just about making peace. They don't see how hard she tries, or how their words might make her feel unwelcome. I didn't expect my sister to fully understand. Her approach was different, shaped by her own experiences and personality. I knew I would eventually need to address this with mom and my aunt, to clear the air, or at least to make my stance clear. But I also knew an apology from me wouldn't fix the underlying issue, that my family still held on to preconceived notions about my wife, notions that weren't fair or accurate. The house was quiet, the only sounds the occasional distant bark of a neighborhood dog, and the soft hum of the refrigerator. The conversation with my mom and aunt had left a palpable tension hanging in the air, thick enough to choke on. Alone in the small guest room where we were staying, I replayed the evening's events over in my mind, each word and sharp glance looping endlessly. In hindsight, I could see where I might have approached things differently. Maybe I could have been calmer, more diplomatic, instead of letting my emotions get the best of me. But in that moment, hearing them talk about my wife like that, someone who had tried so hard to be part of this family, despite feeling like an outsider, it felt like an instinctive need to protect her had overridden everything else. My wife wasn't just my partner, she was the mother of my children, the person who stood by me unconditionally. Defending her wasn't just a reaction, it felt like a duty. I leaned back against the headboard, the mattress creaking slightly under my weight. The room was filled with old family photos and knickknacks, a stark reminder of the deep roots and history my family had in this place. It made my decision even more difficult knowing that leaving early would be like admitting defeat, like letting those petty comments drive us away. But staying felt untenable too, with every forced smile and careful conversation just adding layers to an already thick facade. The kids were asleep in the next room, blissfully unaware of the grown-up complexities clouding the air around them. I didn't want their memories of this trip to be marred by a sense of underlying conflict, or to feel the tension that I was so acutely aware of. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through it aimlessly for a few moments before I made the decision. I'd booked flights for us to go back home earlier than planned. It wasn't just about escaping an uncomfortable situation, it was about preserving the peace and mental well-being of my family. My wife, who hadn't even come on this trip, deserved to know that her feelings were validated, not just by words, but by actions. As I looked up flights, I realized this was more than just a logistical change, it was a statement. I wasn't just leaving early, I was making it clear that while family was important, the respect and well-being of my immediate family, my wife and kids, came first. She's not opposed to the idea of visiting my home country, and has done so in the past. Her job is just very demanding and she said she'd rather do a longer trip with the four of us. We have 2 kids, when she can arrange more time off and the trip isn't solely based on seeing my mom. My wife's relationship with my home country, and especially with my family, is complicated to say the least. She's not against the idea of visiting. In fact, she's joined me several times before. But her job in corporate law is demanding. Long hours, constant deadlines, high stakes. That kind of pressure doesn't pause for anything, not even family trips across the globe. She's practical about it. She told me once, over a late dinner while the kids were already in bed, that she would rather wait and take a longer trip together with the four of us. If we're going to travel that far, let's make it a real vacation, not just a quick visit, she had said. Her logic was sound. It wasn't just about the travel time but also about the opportunity to truly relax and enjoy each other's company, without the shadow of obligations or past tensions lurking in the background. The last part is crucial because the trips to see my mom have often been tense. It's nobody's fault, really. It's just that their worlds are so different, and my mom has this way of making her opinions known in a manner that's a bit too straightforward for my wife, who is accustomed to the more measured, polite exchanges of her professional world. So, this time around, when the opportunity came for me and the kids to visit my mom, my wife encouraged us to go while she stayed behind to manage a major case at work. She framed it as practicality, not preference. Go, have fun with your mom. The kids miss her, and it's important they spend time with her, she had said, kissing me goodbye as we headed for the airport. She's always been clear about boundaries. If my mom were to visit us, she would welcome her with open arms, offer her the guest room, cook her meals, and engage in pleasant conversation. There's no animosity, just a preference to avoid situations she knows will be uncomfortable. This isn't just about personal comfort, it's about maintaining peace, about ensuring that when we do spend time together, it's quality time, not just obligated time filled with awkwardness and forced conversations. My wife has always been very composed about her feelings towards my mom. She isn't the type to harp on things unnecessarily. Early on, back when our relationship was shifting from serious to truly committed around the time of our engagement, I asked her point blank about her hesitation towards my mom. It was a quiet evening, just the two of us cleaning up after a quiet dinner at home, when I broached the topic. Her response was straightforward, devoid of any malice. She explained that the unease stemmed from my mom's long absence in my childhood, which to her signaled potential complexities in family dynamics she'd rather not entangle herself with more than necessary. She wasn't judgmental about it, she just laid out her feelings with the kind of clarity and foresight she applies to most things in life. It's about ensuring we have less stress in our interactions, so we can enjoy our time together as a family when it happens, she had said, her tone even, but firm. That conversation set the tone for how things would be, and true to her word, she hasn't brought it up unless absolutely necessary. Over the years, becoming a parent myself has opened my eyes further to her perspective. The thought of not being there for my kids, of leaving them prematurely, is unbearable. I see now how my wife's understanding of family and commitment could be so deeply affected by my mom's choices. Having children has a way of amplifying the protective instincts, the desire for stability and presence. It's clarified for me why my wife places such a premium on these qualities, and it's helped me appreciate her stance, even if I don't always fully share her reservations. Update. It's been a few months since I made my post. After reading your comments, I realized it would be rash to leave without trying to sort things out, so I had a conversation with my mom the next morning when my aunt was out and my kids were still in bed. The morning after the tense conversation with my mom and aunt, I approached my mom for a private talk. The house was quiet, with soft light filtering through the curtains, casting a calm over the living room where we decided to sit down. I could tell she was apprehensive about the discussion, perhaps worried about more confrontations. I started by apologizing for my outburst the previous night. My tone was firm yet conciliatory. I wanted to clear the air but also to stand by my wife's perspective, which I felt was important to communicate clearly. I'm sorry for how I reacted, I began. But we need to talk about why you think it's okay to say those things about my wife. My mom nodded, her expression one of regret mixed with a hint of defensiveness. She listened as I reiterated that the comments I overheard were hurtful, and simply, not true. If there are issues, we should be able to discuss them openly, not just let them fester, I added, hoping to establish a more open line of communication. My mom sighed, a long weary exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of the past decades. I understand, but you need to see where I'm coming from too, she responded. She then explained how isolating it was for her after my dad passed away, how she needed to be around her own family back home to grieve. It wasn't about escaping from you or your sister, she insisted. I listened, trying to bridge my understanding with her experience. I get that, Mom, and I don't think anyone faults you for needing support, I said. But my wife sees it differently. She can't understand leaving kids behind during such a critical time, regardless of the grief. My mom bristled slightly at this. It's unfair for her to judge my actions from back then. She wasn't there. She didn't see the pain I was in. Her voice broke a little, her eyes conveying the turmoil of those days. You and your sister don't hold it against me, do you? I shook my head, trying to reassure her while also explaining my wife's point of view. We don't resent you, Mom, because we love you and we know you did what you felt was necessary. But you have to understand that my wife views family responsibilities differently, especially now that we have our own kids. The conversation moved slowly, with pauses that were filled with unspoken thoughts and regrets. I stressed that my wife's feelings were valid, just as her actions had been to her at the time. It's not about right or wrong, I concluded. It's about understanding each other's perspectives and finding a way to respect them. I can't make my wife forgive you, Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice even despite the frustration building inside me. And I need you to stop speaking poorly about her. It's important you tell Aunt Jane to do the same. Mom listened, her expression a mix of understanding and helplessness. I'll do what I can, you know I will, she replied. But then she added, but I can't control what your aunt says or does, she has her opinions. This response frustrated me further. But don't you see? It's not just about opinions. It's about respect. If there's talk like that going on, it creates an environment I don't want around our kids. They pick up on everything, Mom. The idea of my children overhearing such comments about their mother worried me deeply. I can't be comfortable in a place where my wife, their mom, is disrespected. It's not just about us adults, it's about what kind of example we set for them. Mom nodded slowly, seemingly understanding the gravity of my concerns, but she held firm on her stance about my aunt. I'll talk to her, I promise. I'll try to make her see. But you know how she is, stubborn. And I can't openly criticize her. She's helped me through a lot. The room fell silent for a moment as I processed her words. The sunlight streaming through the window cast long shadows across the floor, a stark reminder of the day moving forward while we seemed stuck in this impasse. I looked at my mom, seeing the years of strain etched into her face, realizing that her relationship with her sister was just as complex as any other family dynamic. I understand she's family, I finally said. And I get that you've supported each other through thick and thin. But this is important. It's about protecting my family's well-being. Mom sighed, a sound of resignation mixed with resolve. I'll do my best, she repeated, her tone more assured this time. No one should feel unwelcome in my home. Things weren't going anywhere, so I told my mom I was going to go home early. She got upset and defensive, and I realized she would also keep badmouthing my wife, just when I wasn't around. That was the final straw. I went back upstairs and got flights for the next day. I sent my wife a text saying we'd be home early and I'd explain when I got back, but everyone was alive and healthy. She said that she was looking forward to it and asked if I wanted to call, but I just wanted to do it all in person. The next 24 hours in my mom's house were like walking on a tightrope, each of us carefully navigating around the tension that had settled in the air after our talk. The house, usually filled with the comforting smells of home-cooked meals and the sounds of casual family chatter, now felt unnaturally quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to break the silence. As we packed up our things, the kids obliviously chattered about the trip, unaware of the undercurrents swirling around them. They were excited about going home, talking non-stop about showing their mom the souvenirs they had picked out for her. I tried to match their enthusiasm, but my mind was preoccupied with the conversation I'd had with my mom and the unresolved issues it left hanging between us. Finally, with our bags packed and the car loaded, I went to say goodbye to my mom. She stood in the doorway, her posture tense. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. When will I see you and the kids again? She asked, her voice thick with emotion. I took a deep breath, knowing my answer would be difficult for her to hear. Mom, I want you in our lives, you know that. But things need to change before we come back. My wife deserves to be treated with respect, and I can't justify bringing the kids into a situation where that might not happen. The words hung heavily between us. Mom looked down, nodding slowly. I understand, she murmured. I'll work on things with your aunt. I promise. Her voice was sincere, and I believed her intent, but the reality of the situation was more complex than just promises made in the moment. I hope so, Mom, because we miss you. But I need to put my wife and kids first, I continued, trying to keep my tone gentle yet firm. It was essential for her to understand that while I cherished our family ties, I couldn't compromise on the values I wanted to teach my children, about respect and kindness. Mom reached out, pulling me into a hug, a bit of the old warmth returning momentarily. Give them my love, she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. Tell them Grandma thinks about them every day. As I got into the car and drove away, the image of my mom standing in the doorway lingered in my rearview mirror. When I got home, the sense of relief was palpable. After the tension of the last few days, walking through the door to see my wife in the familiar surroundings of our own space was grounding. She greeted me with a hug that seemed to physically lift the weight off my shoulders. The kids were already asleep, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the dishwasher in the background. We settled down in the living room, her on the couch with a cup of tea, me in the armchair across from her. She waited patiently as I recounted everything that had happened, my conversation with my mom, the awkward silence that followed, and the strained goodbye. When I told her about what happened, about the comments my mom and aunt had made, she let out a small laugh, more out of resignation than amusement. "Well, I'm glad I only got upgraded to a snob," she said wryly. "It could have been much worse." Her attempt at lightening the mood was appreciated, but her eyes were serious, concerned about the impact of what had transpired. "I stood up for you," I said, wanting her to know that her dignity was something I defended unequivocally. I made it clear that we couldn't just brush those comments under the rug. She reached across to squeeze my hand, her smile warm. "Thank you. That means a lot to me. Not just that you stood up for me, but that you're thinking about what this means for us as a family." The conversation shifted then to what the future held for my relationship with my mom. "I told her we need some space," I continued, "that I still want her in our lives, but our immediate family has to come first." My wife nodded, understanding the difficulty of the decision. "I support whatever you need to do," she said. "Just know that whatever distance you need to put, I'm here for you. We're in this together." Her words were reassuring, reinforcing that the choices I was making were not just my own burden to bear but something we navigated together as partners. "I think it's the best thing for now," I concluded, feeling a bit more confident in our path forward. "It'll give everyone some time to reflect and hopefully heal a bit." She smiled, that same reassuring smile that had seen us through countless other challenges. "I'm proud of you," she added. "It's not easy standing up to family, but you're doing what's best for us. That's what matters." It's been several months since we returned from that charged visit to see my mom, and life at home has settled into a comfortable rhythm. The kids are thriving, oblivious to the adult complexities that sometimes shadow the edges of family life. My wife and I have found solace in the normalcy of our daily routines: work, school runs, weekend soccer games. Despite the undercurrents of that trip, our home life feels solid, anchored. I've made it a point to keep in touch with my mom, dialing her number every couple of weeks. But each call seems to resurrect a bit of the tension from our last visit. Her voice often carries a tightness that wasn't there before, and our conversations are punctuated by long pauses where words used to flow easily. It's clear she's still processing the boundaries I set, and perhaps feeling a bit isolated by them. My sister, who has always been the peacemaker in the family, tells me during our own calls that she's keeping up her regular chats with mom. She mentions that mom feels judged, not just by what happened during our last visit but by the enduring echo of her past decisions. "She's still hurting," my sister explained one evening, her voice laced with concern. "She feels like everyone's holding her grief against her." I listen, and I try to understand. Grief is a strange, malleable thing that touches everyone differently. I hope with time, mom will see that it's not about judgment but about understanding each other's boundaries and emotional spaces. As much as I want my kids to have a relationship with their grandmother, their only living grandparent, I'm acutely aware of the need to protect my wife's emotional well-being. She's been incredibly supportive and understanding, but I know the situation has been hard on her too. The balance is delicate, trying to navigate these waters without tipping anyone overboard. Since becoming a father, my perspective on family and relationships has shifted significantly. It's like my children have opened up new chambers in my heart and mind, chambers filled with deeper empathy and understanding, especially towards my wife. Watching her as a mother, seeing her dedication and the boundless love she pours into our children, I find myself constantly amazed and grateful for her presence in our lives. The thought of losing her, of my kids facing life without their mother, sends a cold shiver down my spine. It's something I can't even bear to think about for too long. This fear, this visceral reaction, it helps me understand why she's so sensitive about family matters and why she's been so adamant about setting boundaries with my mom. It's not just about past grievances or discomfort. It's about ensuring our family unit remains stable and supported, no matter what. Reflecting on this has also given me a fresh lens through which to view my own childhood. I forgive my mother for her choices during our most difficult times, decisions made while she was engulfed in her own sea of grief. I know that she did what she felt was necessary to survive emotionally, even though it meant being physically distant from me and my sister. Forgiveness, however, doesn't erase the understanding of the impact of those decisions. It doesn't wipe away the fact that those choices left marks, shaping how I view relationships and responsibilities. This empathy I hold for my wife, stemming from our shared parenting journey, makes me think about how I would feel if the roles were reversed, if it had been her parents who had left her in a similar situation. Honestly, I doubt I could easily forgive such an action. The mere idea stirs a protective instinct in me that is fierce and uncompromising. I would want to shield her from that kind of pain, just as I try to protect our children from any hurt or unnecessary hardship. This has led to many conversations between us, sometimes late into the night when the world is quiet and it's just the two of us, sharing our thoughts and fears. These discussions are sometimes tough, but they're always cathartic. They bring us closer, aligning our understanding and approach to how we manage our relationships with our extended family. Thanks for all your advice. For those of you who said I should get therapy, I am doing fine, but thanks for the concern.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked. We could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children. With zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1, if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike. What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.